Hello, everyone. My name is Kristin Snowden, and I do webinars here at sexandrelationshiphealing.com one time a month, every second Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. And so I'd invite you to all to join anytime. It's free. And what we cover is just anything and everything related to relationships. Our lives are centered around relationships. We are neurobiologically wired to connect with other people. A lot of what we do and won't do is motivated by our connections with other people, but yet we never have any classes growing up on how to effectively connect with other people, communication skills, figuring out what's going on inside our body, how to deal with really uncomfortable crisis field moments in life. And specifically at sexandrelationshiphealing.com, we talk a lot because a lot of the people who are seeking out help from that website are people who are sex addicts or addicts of other type of substance use kind of issues, and then their betrayed partners. So people who have just found out that their partner has betrayed them through lies and secrets in an addictive kind of way. But this is applicable to anyone. And so also I wanted to mention to go over to my website too. I've been working on revamping it and adding some more material. There's live workshops that are being set up and added all the time. It's KristinSnowden.com, different course offerings, psychoeducational videos. I have lots of betrayed partners workshops that I'm always adding, and they fill up pretty quickly. But I'm also going to be trying to add, these are some Brene Brown things. I'm a certified Daring Way provider. And so I try to run some workshops where we explore the topic that I'm going to be talking about today, which is kind of the shame that shows up in our life and how to practice shame resiliency to kind of get it out, shake it out, and move forward in a healthier way possible. So betrayed partners groups as of right now are specific to female partners of male sex addicts. I encourage kind of everybody else under any other genre to seek out these other workshops that I kind of work on concepts around intimacy issues, exploring your shame voices, how they and exploring the crisis and how you're responding to it. I'm live there with you, so you can ask. There's a lot of questions that are about a specific story or situation in your life and how to handle it, developing your values and your goals and how to kind of act and practice in alignment with those kind of things. Also with recovering from infidelity, like single infidelities, like there was a one-time affair, a year-long affair, emotional affairs, that maybe you don't feel like you fit under the genre of sex or love addiction or something like that. And so this general workshop would be more appropriate, I guess. So, but it's co-ed. I've run several where it's co-ed and it goes really well. And my focus is on community building. So I provide lots of breakout sessions where I'm not there, but it provides opportunities for the cohorts to kind of meet and talk and share stories and maintain communication offline. So I'm working on building up a community because I think we've learned that's kind of where it's all at, is we need to find a place where we can go, where we don't feel judged, where we can kind of say the banana stuff that's going on in our head and people can hear us and say, me too, or maybe not exactly that, but this is what's going on in my head. And you guys can kind of be empathetic and compassionate despite everyone's flaws, which without further ado, so yeah, I've been working on talking about Life Anonymous's applications of how I, as a non-addict, found freedom and help and healing as I understood more about the 12-step concepts of AA. Now, because AA was specifically written for addicts and addicts recovering and healing, and while there's also a lot of other fellowships for people who struggle with gambling, sex addiction, love addiction, food issues, codependency, but they also have more Al-Anon, like people who love addicts, and working a separate program for people who are in relationship with addicts and boundary setting and stuff around that. I just kind of was talking about anything and everything that I learned with co-writing with an addict himself. So Scott Brassard is my co-writer. He's a recovering addict, and we kind of talk about how you can approach the 12 steps as an addict and how you can approach the 12 steps as a non-addict, but still benefit from the exercises, the concepts, the community building. So previously I covered 1 through 3, and there's a saying for steps 1 through 3. It's a soundbite. You can't, God can, so let him. And that's saying 1, 2, 3. You can't, God can, so let him. And so you can go back and look at those. But I know sometimes when people hear the word God, they just shut down, close off, and they don't want to hear anything more. And they want to like click the button to switch around. But Tami and I talk about, and so does Scott in this book, about how it doesn't need to be this singular deity. It doesn't have to be the version of God that maybe you were taught and sometimes abused by as a child. That it can be just any higher power or outside power that's not your addict, that you can accept influence from, seek out for help, find love and forgiveness from. And so I say the word God, but it is much bigger and broader than that word. And so I'd encourage you to listen to the step 3 that Tami and I did a month ago. And then it's so let him, meaning you intentionally open up your heart and mind to letting this outside higher power, this outside community of your support community, a sponsor, a therapist, to say, I'm struggling. These are the things that aren't working for me anymore. My best thinking keeps getting me in this circus, and I got to get out of it. So once you go through those 3 steps, it all prepares you for the next step, which is considered a pretty big doozy one in the 12 steps, because it is creating a searching and fearless and searching inventory. I want to get the very specific. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now, remember, this is written for addicts. So often the step 4 is focused more on the negative parts. It's written with addicts in mind who have a pretty common personality flaw of struggling of seeing beyond themselves. So they constantly are like, Scott talks about, well, I always use my family as justification for why I have the right to act out, or my childhood trauma as entitlement for acting out, or why I was entitled, I didn't like my job or I hated my boss, so I could show up to work high. Like these were all kind of stories that he would tell himself and other addicts tell themselves so they can keep their addiction going. That my wife's nagging me and she's nagging and I don't like her, and the sex got boring, or she gained weight after the kids, so I have the right to go out and do these things. And, if she found out, she'd be really upset because she's super emotional. And so, it's just better off if I just don't tell her because, she can't handle this. And so they tell very elaborate stories to kind of protect their fragile ego. So step 4 is meant to make them sit down and explore their patterns, how they contributed to the messiness that exists in their life. And Scott words it as how they are an active participant in the mess of their lives, which I think is a really great way of saying it. Kind of break that wall of their struggle with perspective and knock it down, and see the way their behaviors and responses to other people's choices have harmed other people, how their bad choices have harmed other people. So he talks about how you can do step 4. He talks about sometimes it's about listing ways that you've avoided taking responsibility, how you've lied to cover up things, how you've misused your anger, right? Because anger is not necessarily a bad thing, but you've used it maybe in an abusive way, in a non-productive way, in a way of justifying and feeling entitled to do your addiction. List your fears, list your injustices. One of my clients at one of my treatment centers found this pattern of his righteous indignation. So that's the word that we always talked about. He's like, that's kind of what the precursor to his acting out is someone would do him wrong or he wouldn't get the result that he wanted, and he acted out of righteous indignation. Like, how dare you? And I was like, as a non-addict, I'm like, that's me. I do that too. I maybe don't go out and like have sex with prostitutes or like cheat on my partner, but I make bad choices out of my own righteous indignation of how dare you. If you don't If you don't treat me right, then I don't have to treat you right. Or if my partner cheats on me, then that creates an open playing field for me to go out and cheat on them or something like that. Or, if my marriage ended because of cheating, then I can flirt with married men too, because, no one sanctified and appreciated my marriage. So why should I do that? The problem with that is that every night, and we're going to talk more about shame, I have to lay down on the pillow and sleep with myself. And if you've listened to my webinars, you know that the way I explain shame is this really uncomfortable emotion within us that is whispering at us all the time. What if you're not enough? Basically, we are so neurobiologically wired to connect with other people. It's such a strong drive in all of our wiring. It feels really good when we're in connection with other people, when we're winning, when we're having sex, when we're kissing, we're having those deep talks, when you're laughing with friends. Lots of feel good hormones come out. And then conversely, lots of horrible, yucky emotions come out when we're losing, when we're failing, we're in adversity with another person, when we're in disagreement, when we think someone doesn't like us or they're mad at us or they don't think they like what we've done or said. And so as long as we have an extremely strong wiring to connect with other people, we're going to have an opposing force that is always present. And that is shame. It's that fear of, oh, you want this so much? What if this package is so effed up, you don't get it? And so it doesn't go away. It always exists. But the way I explain it is that every day you are on trial by your shame voices trying to convict you of being a crappy human. It's, for better or worse, it's that negative bias that we have in our head. It's the way it's this survival mechanism that's meant to keep us alive and keep us in community and create fear in us when we don't have that or it's being threatened. But at the same time, it haunts our souls and our brains, and it collects information of like, oh yeah, you said such a dumb thing, or ooh, you lied, or yeah, you might have justified it there, but you really know what you did was a crappy thing. And it's a very fine line. So people who are addicts, or even people who are non-addicts and they're trying to live and love and connect honestly with people, you've got to keep your side of the street clean and not use righteous indignation or fear or anger as justification to act out in a particular way. So he lists a couple things, and in the back of the chapter, he gives very specific exercises about how they sometimes work 12 steps. And the focus is to focus on kind of what you've become ashamed of for doing, ways that you haven't lived up to your values or practices, and then also what behaviors have hurt others. So those are just kind of the inventory, right? So we think of taking stock inventory. We kind of look at the entire grocery aisle, and that's their stock and inventory. That's what steps 4 is asking you to do. From childhood wounds, victimizations, to the ways that you responded, to the ways that you can also be good and great. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. Let me just say that there was a quote that I liked that he said, oh, resentments fall into a few general categories. So one of the step 4s is also talking about fears and resentments. And sometimes they have these kind of categorized, that general categories of in your family, in your relationships, in work, in school, in religion, in politics, etc. And just kind of going through each one of those categories and figuring out where you have resentments with loved ones, with situations, with the outside environment. I'm resentful of COVID, but I have to explore the way that my resentment and my anger towards the situation is impacting the way I show up for my children or my husband or for my work or for my clients, right? It doesn't give me automatic entitlement to have a short temper and bite my head off or bite other people's head offs because this thing is happening to me and at me. So also exploring how these impact parts of yourself, your self-esteem, your pride, your emotional security, your finances, your ambition, personal relationships, sexual relationships, your physical health, etc. So again, moral inventory of everything. And by the way, to think that you could do this by yourself is a big, big error, This is not like a sit down in the quietness of your home and try to do this exercise. I strongly, strongly encourage that you do this with the help of an appropriately trained therapist. Maybe if you have a really great community of people, or again, you can be attending these Prodependence Anonymous meetings and work the steps with sponsors or a community around there, other Al-Anon programs, etc. If you're a non-addict, for instance, if you are an addict, then you can join whatever appropriate 12-step group you find helpful. I know people that will do these in some church groups, etc. Let me talk about some of the errors of 12 steps, or I'm sorry, of doing step 4 in a not great way, is attempting to complete the step without help from a 12-step sponsor, professional, or a supportive community. This, like when you explore your shame stuff through these workbooks, through the Brene Brown stuff, it is meant to be, if you're not physically struggling through the process, you're not doing it right. There's a joke when we all got trained with the Brene Brown stuff, day 2 is really hard because we learned the material by going through the material. And it's talking about the shame stories that you have about the people you love, or the dreams that you've had, or the expectations you've put on yourself. And if it doesn't choke you up, then you're probably not getting to the core issues. But with that said, you need a supportive community that when you've kind of doused yourself in these shame realities and these shame voices that you walk with every day, you need to speak them out with a loving, non-judgmental, empathetic, compassionate group of people, even if it's just 1 or 2 people, to get through it and not have it eat you away, especially, again, if you love an addict. Because as we know, when you uncover your partner's addiction, you're already drowning in a heaping pile of shame. And I'm going to talk about that. So let's talk about step 4 for non-addicts. I started talking about how the idea of step 4, doing a fearless moral inventory of myself, scared the crap out of me, because I'm one, Brene Brown says that there's the types of people that kind of puff their chest up, or they shrink and they're small. And I've always been a chest puffer outer. I've always been someone that if you make me feel small, I'll bite your head off. If I walk into a room, I start with my trophies and cash and prizes to prove that I'm worthy of being in that room. And if you criticize me, you're my enemy for life. Or I don't know what to do with it, or I finally am justified to be horrible to you because you've told me you have a different opinion than me, and my fragile ego can't handle that. So how dare you? So I learned that it wasn't bad that this scared me. It was just my ego was too fragile to handle it. That, like, I have worked my whole life, excuse me, that to put on this facade that I was lovable, that I was confident, that I was a good parent, and I'm good at my job, but it was just this thin sheath of a facade that, like, if there was a tiny poke in the hole, it would all stop working. So pointing out a chink in my armor, a flaw in my character, proof that I was imperfect, or even worse, unlikable or unlovable, I couldn't handle it. When others would share their observations of me, disagree with me, or challenge my choices or perspectives, I could not hear what they were saying. I don't know about you, but now one of my new favorite sayings about communication is listen to understand, not to respond. I didn't know how to listen to understand another person because I was too busy creating my defense argument for why I was okay, why I was justified, why these are all the reasons to prove that I was worthy and to defend myself and defend my choices. I could never hold space for hearing another person's experience, reality, issues, opportunities for growth were completely missed because my whole body would become flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, and it would shut down my executive functioning brain, and my ability to be productive and smart and make good choices would just go out the window. The only difference really would be that I just didn't drink a bunch of alcohol or do a bunch of drugs to like down-regulate it again. I'd make other bad choices. So instead of being able to hear these opportunities for growth or just these differences of opinions or different experiences that other people had of me or of the situation, I would just hear that I was bad, I was wrong, I was defective, I was less than. And these were things that I worked my entire life not to be. So instead of like hearing that experience and saying, okay, well, what's true for me? What works for me? Does this make sense? I hear you. Sometimes your reality is different than mine. Sometimes we'll have to agree to disagree. All I would just hear is like, either you're dismissed from my life forever, or I'm invested in kind of hating you and you being a horrible person, or I'm just going to run on that treadmill faster and I'm going to be better and do better and be more, even though it's going to build up a heaping pile of resentment because I feel like I was enough and I feel like I tried my best. And so I'm going to hate you for making me run on that treadmill. So that's just kind of some of the stuff I was dealing with. So an important thing to understand is that the step 4 is a path that is following up that humbling and surrendering thing that you're asked to do in step 3. That's kind of asking you to prepare your heart and your mind to be surrendered to the fact that we're all imperfect, that we all struggle with our value and worth. The people that own it and share it are the ones who are more free in this world. It's helping you, step 4 is helping you break through that fragile ego. And that fragile ego is the same thing that made me feel like I wasn't enough to ask for boundaries, wasn't enough to ask for needs to be met, not enough to follow through with the consequences of if you do this to me, or if you don't, if we don't go to couples counseling, if we don't continue to talk about these issues, if you don't continue to, do X, Y, or Z from other people, follow through with commitments, speak to me respectfully, treat me the way that I try to treat you, that fragile ego never let me follow through with those consequences because there'd always be that feeding story in my head of, oh yeah, this is all about you being not enough, not about that other person. And so you have to intentionally work to get your needs met and create a life where we feel safe and heard. And step 4 will help you get there. Some people, this is the tough thing about step 4. So I hope you hear this, especially if you're a partner of an addict. Some people, when they're doing step 4, especially addicts themselves, kind of need, like, metaphorically speaking, their nose kind of shoved in the shame. So there needs to be a focusing on how they've harmed other people, how they've lied, how they've avoided responsibility, how they've done all these bad choices that have hurt other people, because they don't want to own it. They want to blame it on other things. And then it helps them realize that their addict is within them. It's their problem, right? You can't blame your choice to sexually act out or abuse substances on your childhood trauma. Yes, it's a reason. Yes, something happened to you. Yes, it needs to be processed, but it is not a lifelong green light for you to lie and sneak around and break commitments and hurt other people. So doing that kind of step 4 and that really brutal kind of shoving your nose in shame and realizing what you've done helps set up the freeing parts of like 5, 6, and 7. But a lot of betrayed partners of addicts are already wallowing and drowning in that shame swamp. So sometimes step 4, we need to spend a little extra time on the positive parts, because inventory also has good stuff. Inventory is a ton of negative stuff. So it can be, this is why I deserve to ask for my needs to be met. This is why I deserve to be treated with honesty, with commitment, with someone following through with what they're saying they're going to do. This is why I deserve to be around people who tell me the truth, who say what they mean and mean what they say. This is why I deserve to live in safety and honesty, and vulnerability. Is to focus on your worth and your value as a part of your step 4. And so you have to do it, and it's got to be fearless, because it has to be done without fear of rejection, judgment, or shame. And the freedom comes when you kind of write this really messy thing and you look at it, and maybe the 5 other people in your group who are doing it with you or whomever, you see how messy theirs is. And then you talk to other people about their messiness. I mean, I can say from firsthand experience, I guess I have the blessings of being able to hear everybody's dark stories. And I can tell you that we all have our own heartbreaking stories of how our flawed loved ones fall short. It's just part of our DNA. If we breathe, we're going to be imperfect, perfectly imperfect, but still imperfect. We're going to execute things in a way that's going to disappoint somebody or fall short to myself or to another person, etc. And so none of us are spared from that reality that we all struggle with shame. We struggle with fear of what if we're not enough, and struggle with traumas that we might have experienced in life where other flawed humans have hurt us. And I have a section in the book that's exploring just very generally about what trauma is in people's lives: threatening behavior, psychological abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, talking about gaslighting, betrayal trauma, but helping you kind of start dipping your toe in that concept of trauma and how trauma certainly feeds those shame voices in you about why you're not enough, why you don't deserve what what you've been asking for, why you don't deserve to be safe, why you don't deserve to have someone loving you the right way, etc. So let me just finish with this with a little bit of follow-up about what step 4 is, and then I'll take your questions. Developing a list of ways in which we may be flawed or fall short is not meant to rub our faces in the mud and make us feel worse about ourselves. That is not the point of step 4. It's meant to humble our souls and envelop us in the truth and realistic understanding that we're imperfect, period. This is what humility is, an acceptance of our own reality. Becoming humbled in this way is the beginning phase of creating transparency instead of lies, facades, and manipulation. It's admitting to blind spots and personality flaws while letting go of the need to be perfect. It's exposing and exploring childhood wounds, painful conflicts, relationship difficulties, moral failures, and poor decision making. Step 4 is not about the avoidance of sin, of flaws, of wrong choices, of mistakes. It's not about trying to create perfection once you own how imperfect you are. It's not possible. It's just meant to acknowledge and own that we struggle to achieve growth. We fail at it miserably. And that in conjunction with step 5, this is just a process. This is the beginning process of kind of peeling the onion layers and bringing us kind of raw and vulnerable, our raw, vulnerable selves out to the world and starting to build new ways of thinking and engaging with other people. It's that kind of concept of you have to break something down in order to rebuild it kind of thing. It's a commitment to practice being the best person we can be, regardless of the conditions and of where we were raised and the bad choices we might have made and the not so pretty history of what's been going on from today and earlier. But also, I think it's mainly about the importance of building up shame resiliency. Again, as a certified Brené Brown, Daring Way person, I see the way shame plays a role in so much harmful behavior. It really is at the core of all addiction, all abusive, toxic relationships, all violence. It is at the core of it. And so you have to rip it out from underneath everything and kind of shake it out and learn how to build resiliency practices around it. And it has to be done with other people. So with that said, that is step 4, and I'm open for other questions.
So if you have questions, if you would put them in the Q&A, and there's somebody that put one in the chat, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I wanted to tag on. One of the things in my 4th step that was critically important was to also look at how how I'd hurt myself. Others, absolutely, but also how I'd hurt myself. And having that understanding of, if I continue on this path, it's going to negatively affect me as well. I also had to, because I had a ton of shame, I had to put some, it was, if you're taking an inventory, like you said in the grocery store, it's not, you're looking at what you have, all the things, and taking accountability for that. So from my standpoint, and I did it with community, my sponsor, encouraged me to put down good things too. I had, humility is about an accurate assessment of who we are. So that includes the things that are in the pro, not just the con column. So, but yeah, the healing, I often see people who, get stuck and I don't want to do the 4-step or whatever. And they're the ones that relapse because, if we're not really willing to dig into what those things are, the good and the bad, and honestly, and I hate to even use those words, good and bad. It's like,
Right.
things that are not as helpful for me, some things that are destructive for me and my loved ones,
Right.
etc. So if I'm willing to look at those things, then I can change things. You were talking too about being puffed up and, not, having to have the facade of, I got this, I got this. And, that's, I had this thought of what a lonely place that is to be, is like, I've got this, I've got to have this exterior, if people really knew me, I can't let them really see anything underneath. And so the healing aspects of being in community and looking at this and being able to say, okay, tell me more about that. I hear what you're saying. Tell me more, rather than having the rapid response, for things. So, but I really love the grocery store. I was like, oh, that's a great, because it isn't, it's just like, what's in there? What's in the grocery store,
What's
so
in
that I
there?
know, yeah, what do I have? What do I have to work with? So,
Yeah.
okay. So,
I mean, and I'm going to talk because I see some of the stuff written over here, but
and any questions, if you would please put them in the Q&A. It's way easier. The chat.
yeah.
Yeah, it's way easier. So
One of the clients, ironically, the pumpkin pie please that we were talking about earlier, says a comment that's really, really common is, how does step 4 have anything to do with nothing I did created an environment that allowed my partner to be an addict?
right.
And yes, do not confuse that. They're two very separate issues. Your partner, because of his or her own journey, decided to use really unhealthy coping skills to get through his or her life. He or she lied, cheated, betrayed, snuck around. That is his or her step 4. That's the stuff that he or she is going to have to rumble through. Yours is supposed to be completely separate. So if you could imagine, let's go back to the grocery thing. You have your own grocery store. Your partner has their own grocery store. History, choices, trauma, good, bad, light, dark, positives, negatives, etc. Ways you hope to respond, ways that you fell short in responding appropriately, when you fell short in your values and goals. It's this misnomer that, like, I know betrayed partners, the minute they find out about their betrayal, are already in a heaping pile of like, not enough. And you don't want to hear someone be like, well, maybe you're a contributor to this cycle, or enabler, that other horrible word. You One has nothing to do with the other. This book was mainly written for just your own separate process. It was, so it's a little bit different than, like, let's say an Al-Anon book, because an Al-Anon book is written understanding that I'm walking along an addict as a partner. And that, so it talks a lot about his or her addiction in incorporation of the way you live your life. That's not what this is. This is a book that, if it's completely separate of whatever's going on in other people's lives and what's happening to you, this is your own way of exploring these 12 steps. And to answer, I think the question was, creating a list of shameful things that I've done in response to someone hurting me will make me lessen my shame. No, those are separate things too. Someone harming me is separate from the way I responded to it, which is separate from the shame voices. So what it really is supposed to be is an opportunity for you to kind of create patterns and understand how all this stuff is playing out in your life. For instance, one of the really common things that happens is, despite people not saying, okay, my addicts acting out is my fault, which it's not. A common thing that people will feel shame around is, why have I stuck around? How could I let this person do this to me? Am I that invaluable to him or her that this would happen to me? And really question their own value and worth. And through a step 4, if you realize that, if you realize those shame voices that are going on in your head, just no matter what the addict's doing, we need to work through those. We need to acknowledge that they exist and kind of cast them out and realize they're complete BS, and that you are valued through an inventory of what your value and worth is. Realize that you are valuable and you have the right to set those boundaries, and you have the right to follow through with the consequences, or that you have the right to be angry when promises and commitments aren't followed through on your partner's end, etc. So I hope that answered that question.
And I hear that often too, the shame of like, what's wrong with me that I didn't see it, that I didn't know that, that he or she did this to me, et cetera. So there is a lot. And I really appreciate you going, no, completely separate. So that person's journey, your journey. I think, I've shared your book with a number of people who, like it's hard to understand what a 12-step journey is if you're not the addict going through it.
Right.
And this gives you an opportunity. And as we started this series, in January, this is just really useful living skills, that many of us, for whatever reason, didn't get the whole cookbook method. And so it's an opportunity to better understand what an addict who's working in recovery is going through, but also, like if it gives us an opportunity to grow as a person. Personally, that's on my list of things to do. So I want to engage in that. I want to live differently. I don't want to get caught in in shame spirals and everything else. The other thing is the first 9 steps. This is a 12-step program. We're April. We're talking step 4. And so the first 9 steps are really cleaning out, and understanding and getting set. And then 10, 11, 12, and we'll get to those this fall, but those are about the maintenance, and continuing to live in that. But so this is a process, and each step has its purpose, and they're done in order. It isn't skipping around, although you can start maintenance 10, 11, 12, but otherwise the first 9, there's an order to them. You do this one and then you go to the next one. So 4 and 5 are paired together, and there's a reason. And then 6 and 7, 8 and 9. So there is quite frankly, in my opinion, brilliance. And this all started with a bunch of drunks that a couple of drunks actually, who couldn't stay sober despite really horrible negative consequences, and they learned to do something very different from what they originally did, and it has spread throughout the world. So the power of the 12 steps, regardless of your thoughts on some of the other stuff, but it is the one thing. I read a study a while back, and it is the one thing that is the most likely to have a positive impact on someone changing. So so is there an opportunity for anyone to take a look at that? Absolutely. But it's life. Everybody gets to pick and choose. I do love your daring way, the shame resiliency. I think I get those little shame voices, and fortunately I have got enough to go, what is that trying to tell me? What's the reality? I'm curious about what's going on even in my head. And and most of the time, particularly if I pick up a phone and call somebody, I can or read something. I've got lots of different techniques, but anyway.
But that's also
right.
because, and I'll say that, and I'll read those in a second, but that's also because shame begets more shame, or feeling unsafe, and that rattled state that your neurobiology gets into feeds more shame voices. Yeah. So you're more likely to be able to conquer those shame voices when you do a step 4 and a 5, 6, 7, because 5, 6 through 9, step 4 through 9, because it's the true like shame resiliency process, and seeking out a non-judgmental, empathetic, supportive community to lean into.
So, question, in your opinion, how long should you take and spend on step 4 inventory? As time goes on, I find I can continue to add on and add on and add on. Also, what format do you find best as you try and organize step 4? I love that you're working on step 4. I got to like, yay. So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
We have a couple things in here. So the couple examples were exploring, like I said, the list of misuse of fear. I'm sorry, list use of anger, resentment, a couple other things. Sorry. I'm going blank, but fear assessments, let's see. But then also I talk about, ways you have avoided taking responsibility for life actions, misuse fear, ways you've been paralyzed by fear, things that you've done that you're ashamed of, who's hurt me, who have I hurt. I also have a section on what shame is. And your core beliefs. So guilt, shame, and your core beliefs. So the difference between like I am a mistake versus I made a mistake, and kind of really understanding those things about what contributes to those shame voices. So really, I feel like as like a shame therapist kind of person, I don't know if that's the right title, is I like digging out from your unconscious these shame voices, because we clean and air those out and like amazing things happen. So it's a combination between shame, fear, resentment, hurts, trauma, all of that. I don't know if I answered that, but at the end of each of these chapters, I have specific exercises. Step 4, I mean, I'm trying to think what format to use best to describe. I guess it just depends. If you're more of someone who's been victimized versus more of the ones who've done the victimizing, you kind of want to explore those different things. And as far as to spend on step 4 inventory, I know Russell Brand, like I think one of his quotes in his recovery or addiction book was like, step 4 took me 5 years and 2 weeks. Because it was like 5 years of avoiding it and then 2 weeks to sit down and do it, because
That
it was
makes
just
more
like
sense. I was like, what?
living
So,
it, right? But like
yeah.
living in it, avoiding it, not wanting to touch it with a 10-foot pole, dipping your toe in it again, pulling out. And then finally having the ego strength and the support system and the willingness, right? The surrendering and humbleness to like sit down and do it. So I can't answer that. I don't know if you have a time.
I have some guidance, because what the piece I hear is like, oh, it has to be perfect. It won't be. And you know what? You can do it again, like, and it will be a shorter version, and it'll be, things. It's, for us to remember, particularly depending on how old you are and how much, it's covered. But, when the founders started this, they would take people through the 12 steps, like in the couple of hours, the first meeting they went to, and then they do it again. And as they're helping this newcomer, they would think of something else that they needed to add to theirs. So it's one of those where it doesn't have to be done perfectly. I'll tell you, the freedom of going through that process, particularly after step 5, and people saying like all this shame that I was like, oh, I'm the most horrible person on the planet, and and having somebody go, yeah, that's all pretty typical, your typical female addict. I was like, whoa, like, but the freedom from shame, exactly, of having that, and it wasn't like it made it all okay. It normalized it, and to your point earlier, it's a reason, not an excuse. So now I know, and I don't have, it's not like, oh, I get to do that again. I don't want to do that again, and how can I live differently? So I would encourage you. I was kind of like the 2 weeks sounds good. The year. I mean, I hear people honestly that like, just like you were talking about with Russell Brantwood, like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Oh, I'm avoiding that. It's going to be too traumatic. It's difficult in the moment, but man, the gift of freedom that you get from doing it. So, just set a deadline, maybe end of April. I'm going to be done with this. I'm going to do my 5th step, get a plan, execute, do it again if you have to. It's all good. Okay. We live in an aggressively shaming society right now. Consider John Ronson's book, You've Been So Publicly Shamed. It does create the next generation of addicts, and wounded people are erased. Step 4, more importantly, 5, with a fellow member in recovery, help me rejoin the human race. Thank you. I agree. It also helps you accept others in their humanness. No steps, no promises, gifts of that, and yes, exactly. So
No steps equals no promises.
Equals no promises. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the promises all have so in 12 step, for those of you just joining, there's the 12 steps has promises that come true. And all of them come through in time, and I've been blessed to experience all of them, in recovery. So, not all magically at one moment, but yeah, it's like I said, just the freedom from yeah,
Yeah.
one of mine was situations which used to baffle me. I now know how to handle those things.
Right.
I feel like I was baffled all the time, and I don't feel that way anymore. So
Yeah. Yeah, in case you're wondering, again, as a non-addict or don't know about 12 steps, at the end of completing step 9 in the big book, there's a talking about this thing called the promises. So you might hear that. And it's generally basically saying, look, by the time you've done these 9 steps, you should start really feeling the benefits of them. And it's basically saying, here's some of the gains. You can experience newfound freedom, joy, serenity, acceptance of the past, improved relationship dynamics and relationship skills, reconnections with your intuition and your spirituality and kind of what's going on inside you, the ability to let go of your shame, your suffering, the need for comparison. And it goes on and just kind of says that when you do these 9 steps, this is what you should be expecting towards the end.
So the next question, I totally understand those things. I was talking more on format. Is it best just to write it out, journal it out? I made a list. I had,
Yeah.
in this column, and I had things by category.
Right.
So I
Well,
mean,
because don't
I know
forget 5's
journaling.
about talking it out too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I would say step 4 there is something very therapeutic and ingraining in your executive functioning when you put pen to paper. And then just like there is
yes.
helpfulness when you, like a step 5, bear it out to somebody.
There's a
So
bunch of step 4 guides too. I mean, you can check those out. And so last week, on the Wednesday format, we had Helen Hunter, who talked about journaling. So journaling may be a really useful way of doing it. That's not how I did mine. Mine was truly an inventory. It was like write out, in each category, kind of like the grocery store. You have this much canned goods, you have this much produce. I mean, that type of thing was helpful for me. But I tend to be a more mathematical based person than a creative writing person. So it may have just been my style. So, but there's lots of there's lots of different ways, and try. And if that works, fantastic. My SAPA husband is currently on step 4. He is procrastinating on it, his own words. I see shame really getting in the way and being able to dig deep into his work. He got very defensive around the term gaslighting this week and will only admit to lying and deceiving. We have semantics. We have been through disclosure, but not impact letter yet. So I really don't know that he knows the impact he has had on me. I love the idea of doing a fearless inventory for myself. Not sure I have a question, but we'll take any words of wisdom. So what are your thoughts?
well, doing a step 4 for yourself, I think will really help him understand the gaslighting, because so many people feel the state of confusion or this really deep anger that they can't quite put their finger on, because they're constantly being invalidated, or they're constantly in this state of like a crazy, am I crazy, am I out of my mind, because this person has been gaslighting me constantly, telling me that my instincts and intuition are wrong, that me asking for my needs to be met or sharing my experiences and things are dumb or minimum, or are you on your period, or oh, you're just kind of weird about that, or you're such a nag. And so really a part of your doing your step 4, it could be, gosh, it could run in a gamut of ways, but let me just throw out some examples. If one of my things that I'm ashamed of, or have anger around, is like I would bite my kid's head off, let's say. And so let's say if I did a step 4 in an inventory and I really started looking at anytime my husband and I got in an argument, he completely invalidated me. He told me how ridiculous I was, or how my expectations are too high. It would lead to me biting my kid's head off, or to me harming myself in some way, like maybe starving myself or gorging myself with food, or overspending here or there, or going to a friend's and talking crap about my husband in a way that like makes me feel really gross, that I was like kind of emasculating him or being so cruel or mean. But those were just the end result, or the way I discharged my shame and hurt and confusion. I'm not saying it's all okay. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm just saying doing an inventory can start putting all those puzzle pieces together to start seeing how they all fit together, and how one person is responding off another person, or he or she does something, it throws me into a shame spiral. So I do this and I don't want to, and I'm not practicing my values or goals, and it's feeding my shame. And so blah, blah, blah. Like that's what a step 4 can help with.
And I was, I was thinking about this too. He is intentionally choosing to stay in the muck. I mean, that's what I see with people who don't do a step 4 is, oh, it's going to be so hard. It's going to be so painful. I'm like, it's hard in the moment. It's hard if you set a 2-week limit or what, for 2 weeks, it's going to be not a whole lot of fun. But then you get the freedom from that. You get to, drop off that 100 pounds of garbage that you've been lugging around with you. Why would you want to keep hanging on to that? Particularly because, there's all kinds of studies too, that people that don't complete step 4, their chances of relapse are so much. I mean, I've seen it over the decades.
Right.
When people are stalling, I'm going like, I wonder how long before they're back out. I mean, just because you're still hanging on to all the junk. So
because you're keeping that fragile ego intact instead of destroying it.
Yeah. I'm a sex addict of 27 years with 1 year of sobriety. Yay. Step 4 has been daunting and horrific. However, I'm almost done with it. Good. Would you recommend sharing it with my betrayed spouse? Never. Or is this too triggering and not recommended?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember, step 5 is where you pick the person, between you and the sponsor, or you and your group of people that you're doing your 12-step work with. That's who you're sharing this kind of stuff with.
Yeah.
It's there is disclosure. So don't forget, there's a disclosure that's meant to be structured with your betrayed partner, where she or he gets an opportunity to ask questions and figure out the nature of your acting out. But they're two different things.
And the stuff that you wrote in step 4 is not automatically transferred to your disclosure. I mean, like,
Right.
There'll be components of that, but they're completely different processes and what is shared. So with a step 4, the step 5 is with your sponsor, your peer group, your therapist. If you're, a priest or pastor, I mean, they often hear them as well. So please, read about step 5 and who to pick to share it with. But please do not further traumatize your partner. And if you haven't done a professional disclosure, be looking at what that entails. And we talk about that lots on webinars too. Okay. I have been attending Al-Anon meeting for 3 years. I have been unable to advance to the 4th step. My home group are all individuals who have dealt primarily with alcohol and drug addiction. I am unable to share the sexual addiction of my partner. I'm assuming it is a result of my own shame and sense of inadequacy. Can you comment on this conflict?
I know, that's a really good point. That's why I created Betrayed Partners groups, because it is so nuanced. For some reason, our culture, I feel like sex addiction is where our culture was, where our culture perceives and experiences sex addiction is where our culture was 30 years ago with drug addiction. It was first like, oh my God, your child does that, or your husband drinks too much, or so your family member has drug issues. Like, oh my gosh. But now I feel like that's becoming a little bit more commonplace, and there's a little bit more understanding and appreciation for addiction with substances, not so much with the sex addiction. As we see all this stuff with the Tiger Woods and other people acting out, there's, sex addiction isn't real. It's BS. So I'm validating you. You need to get to be around a couple people. So there is S-Anon, who it's specifically for. There's the Codependents Anonymous, that is great because there's no blaming and shaming that you're a co-addict and you're part of this. It's really giving you the space to just kind of do a version of this, of your own recovery work and your own identity restructuring and your own shame resiliency practices, separate from your addict's behaviors. I know there's like COSA too.
Yeah, and I think pick groups carefully. But here's another thought too. I mean, we have betrayed partner groups. There's one today at 12:30 Pacific time. There's another one tomorrow morning. I mean, so there's a number of betrayed partner groups. And then I will put this in the chat, but WeTonglen, WeTonglen.com. It's a group of betrayed partners, and it's a closed group. Anyway, they're really doing a lot to support each other, and I think you'd really find that to be a good space as well. So
Right.
so consider that. So there are specifically, we have 4 betrayed partner groups every week on our site. And I'll tell you, and there's actually a 5th tomorrow, because Troy Love does his attachment wounds, which really goes to that shame stuff. So at 11 on Thursdays, Pacific time, every other week, Troy Love, who does the men's group on attachment wounds on Fridays, is having a betrayed partner group, specifically for partners, to talk about, like those shame and abandonment, betrayal wounds, all of those things. And I think you'd find that really useful as well. So there is support. It's just you connecting with the right people to be able to be true to your experience. So, okay, losing a friend who was almost like a partner to me in the process of finding out and working a good recovery is daunting. I can see here today that I listened to your question and answer around the 4th step, that working more deeply on myself may ease the pain and confusion. And I agree, don't you? Go ahead.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. And when you put pen to paper, it's nice to know that there is an end to the list. I agree. At some point, you can't think of anything else. When it floats around in my mind, my shortcomings seem endless and haunt me. So Helen Hunt, watch the video that Helen Hunter talks about journaling. I mean, she won an award for her book, and it's journaling and recovery. And there are so many research studies that talk about journaling specifically, and exactly that, putting it down rather than having it floating in your brain. Actually, mine always feels like a ping pong ball. Bing, bing, bing,
Right.
bing, 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 bing.
Well, and remember that these steps are in order for a reason. So it's step 4, but then it is followed by step 5, which is admitted to God or a higher power or whatever that is to you, to ourselves and to another human, the exact natures of our wrongs. So yes, we go through the inventory and we take it and it's overwhelming. And then you walk into an empathetic, loving, non-judgmental space and you share it. And it's like the ultimate emotional vomiting and releasing of all that shame. So it stops controlling you. So it stops owning you. So step 4 comes with the step 5, a release.
And don't get I have a whole bunch of people that have gone they don't want to talk about it. So they don't want to put it on the paper because they don't want to have to talk about it.
Right.
They're separate things. So step 4, like Kristin just said, step 4 is separate from step 5, and it is a release. And so, and you pick someone carefully, a sponsor. Like I said, when I was sitting there going, fear and trepidation of having to share, and then it was like, they didn't, run out of the room screaming, and it was just like, yeah.
Yeah.
So
it
was
Rob's
huge.
treatment center, we had a saying that unless you killed 2 people in the past week, we've already heard the story.
Yeah.
So these people
It's
walk
rare,
around with the
yes.
deep shame of this story, and then 3 people in the group say, "Oh yeah, I did a version of that."
Yeah. And that's exactly what the community is. So, is the book about a Life Anonymous full of stories of recovery? Is it more practical with exercises, reflections, etc.?
All the above.
Yeah.
It's some of Scott's story, some of my story. Scott's a curriculum developer, and so am I. So it's also got exercises. So once we explain and educate on the concepts, we provide exercises to bring it to the surface for you. And then I also share client stories. So at the end of several of the chapters, I kind of share about how that person experienced step 3 or step 4, et cetera, to kind of humanize it for you.
So the next question, what therapy process would you recommend for a betrayed wife with a husband that suffered childhood adverse experience and emotional sexual incest under a highly critical, invalidating mom? He was substantially sexually intimacy and anorexic disorder during our 30-year marriage and has continued his sexual acting out with the same hooker for the past 14 years. We have several partial disclosures. Is 12 steps good enough to help when he refuses professional therapy?
Well, yeah, for sake of time, I'm going to try to be fast. First of all I hear is empathy. So, cheers to you for really doing the work to appreciate all the reasons that contributed to his acting out behavior, but it does not justify or make it okay. And so you make sure to separate out the two. He has a very sad story and it's heartbreaking, and you can be empathetic to the fact that he is carrying around so many scars and wounds. But lying, not following through with his commitments, and not following through with a recovery program that's going to help him stop hurting you and harming other people and exploiting and abusing other people is completely separate. So you can be loving and empathetic about this part and completely intolerant and angry and boundary setting and consequence providing for this other part. And so someone with that much abuse and trauma, really, if you read The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, you realize how much this stuff is just put into our neurobiology and our wiring. So I would think not just 12 steps, but I think some very serious trauma treatments, like someone who specializes in EMDR, brain spotting, somatic experiencing, neurofeedback, et cetera, is going to be needed to help unravel all the trauma and the trauma responses that often happen. There's these books called like Alex Katahakis has this book about sex addiction as an affect dysregulation. So what it's basically saying is I act out because my body is so highly regulated because of all my trauma that I have to act out and go into this system to like downregulate myself. And that can partially be done through 12 steps, partially done by safe groups of people, but also there is like science proven trauma treatments.
So unfortunately, I mean, so Kristin said it earlier, it's a reason, not an excuse for his acting out. This is what we treat as seeking integrity treatment program, is that type of thing. So unfortunately, his unwillingness does not give you any pause for holding strong boundaries for safety for you. I mean, acting out with the same hooker for 14 years, that's emotional. Like there's so much there, and yeah, we're out of time, but honestly, you joining all the betrayed partner groups, you getting support, it isn't okay. You need to be physically safe, emotionally safe, have support. The trauma work that Kristin was talking about, yes, like betrayal trauma is real. I can't tell you how many betrayed partners have physical manifestations, like all kinds of medical health
autoimmune
issues.
disorders.
Yeah, autoimmune is really
high
common.
allergies, high inflammation.
Yeah.
Food
All of those
intolerance, digestion
Yes.
issues, migraines.
As a result of their addicts acting out and the betrayal they're struggling with. So get support for you, regardless of what he does. There is help for you. There is help for him too. But please keep coming back. Again, Betrayed Partner Group at 12:30 today on sexandrelationshiphealing.com Pacific time. This video, a couple of you were asking, and trying to take notes. This video will be posted on sexandrelationshiphealing.com later today. And there's all kinds of other previously recorded webinars on there, including, Kristin's series. In January, we started step 1. So you can catch up with the series. Several of you were new today. And come back again. We'll talk about step 5 in May. So thank you.
And also know that you can check out my YouTube channel too, or my website, KristinSnowden.com.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.